Judgment Day by Janson Davies. Chapter 1. The Court of Supreme Magnitude. The sky above Maltaron was a permanent bruise, violet black and pulsing with the slow churn of magnetic storms. No sun, no moon, just the cold shimmer of the transport portal flaring like a wound in space-time. The Court of Supreme Magnitude stood at the planet's heart, a monolithic structure carved from marble and laced with psychic shielding. It had no doors, no windows, no corridors, only the pillars of the Hall of Judgment, where the galaxy's most reviled beings were brought to face the one entity they feared more than death. Ultimate Justice. Arthella Day sat alone on her throne, a jagged seat of alloy and neural lattice. Her dress was complex, blue and shimmering earth tones with flowing sleeves and woven from cosmic fibers and adorned with mind stones from extinct worlds. Her eyes, pale silver, never blinked. She didn't need to. Her mind was always open. The portal hissed. Another transport arrived. A warlord from the shattered moons of Caleth stumbled forward, shackled and stripped of rank. His eyes darted, searching for a jury, a lawyer, a plea. There were none. Arthella didn't speak. She didn't ask questions. She simply looked, and then she knew. The warlord's crimes unfolded in her mind like a virus. Mass executions, planetary sterilizations, the laughter as he watched cities burn. Arthella felt it all, the guilt, the pride, the buried horror. She raised her hand. The portal flared again, this time with a different hue, red, violent, final. The warlord screamed as he was pulled into the vortex, bound for Hades. Arthella lowered her hand, another name added to the list she would never write down. Another soul cast into the crucible. She had sentenced thousands, perhaps millions. She no longer counted, but she remembered the innocent. 3 names, only 3, and each one haunted her more than all the guilty combined. Outside, the portal shimmered again. Another arrival, another trial. Justice never slept on Maltaron, and neither did she. Chapter 2. Arrival Protocol. The portal pulsed like a heartbeat in the center of the Hall of Judgment. Its edges shimmered with unstable geometry, folding space into a corridor of exile. Each arrival was preceded by a low hum, like the universe itself bracing for another confession. Arthella Day sat motionless, her mind already reaching through the veil. The next to arrive was a technocrat from the drowned cities of Varn. His crimes were buried in algorithms, economic sabotage, planetary collapse, the quiet murder of millions through starvation and debt. He stumbled forward, eyes wide, clutching a data crystal like a talisman. She didn't need it. His guilt was a storm inside him, masked by logic and justification. Arthella felt the cold satisfaction of his decisions, the way he had watched graphs rise while bodies fell. She raised her hand. The portal flared red. He vanished. Next came a trio, mercenaries from the outer rings of the Sorrow Belt. Their minds were fractured, stitched together by trauma and greed. Arthella saw the raids, the slaughter, the children left behind in burning villages. She saw the moment one of them hesitated, and the moment he chose not to stop. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The portal swallowed them. The arrivals continued. A cult leader from the moons of Threx, a bioengineer who weaponized empathy, a general who ordered the sterilization of an entire species. Each one stepped forward, each one was seen, each one was judged. There were no words, no pleas, no bargains, only truth, only Hades. And through it all, Arthella remained silent. Her thoughts were a fortress, her empathy a blade. But somewhere deep inside, a fracture was forming, not from the guilty, but from the weight of being the only one who knew. Chapter 3. The Innocents. The Hall of Judgment was silent now. The portal dimmed. The last defendant had vanished into the red vortex, screaming a name Arthella didn't recognize. She rarely did. The guilty were interchangeable, faces twisted by power, minds corroded by ambition. But the innocent, they stayed. She sat in stillness, letting the silence stretch. It was in these rare moments, between trials, between verdicts, that memory crept in like fog. 3 names. Only 3. The first was Tralen Vire, a child soldier from the ice moons of Cerelia. He had arrived trembling, barely 13, his eyes wide with terror. Arthella had reached into his mind and found only confusion, pain, and the echo of orders barked by men who used children as shields. He had never killed. He had only run. She had let him go. The second was Mira Solen, a rebel medic from the scorched world of Dren. Her hands had healed more than they had harmed. She had smuggled medicine into war zones, defied tyrants, and refused to take up arms, even when her own sister was executed for dissent. Her mind was a garden of grief and resolve. Arthella had wept, quietly, alone. The third was Corin Dax, a diplomat framed by a planetary coup. His thoughts were orderly, his guilt manufactured. Arthella had seen the moment he was betrayed, his closest ally feeding false evidence to the tribunal. He had come to Malteron expecting death. She had given him freedom. 3 names. She whispered them now like a prayer. Tralen, Mira, Corin. They were her proof. That justice, even here, could be merciful. That her powers were not just a blade, but a scale. But they were gone, released into the galaxy, forgotten by most. And she remained, alone. The alien guards kept their distance. They feared her mind more than her rank. She had no family, no friends, no voice but the one that passed judgment. Outside, the portal began to pulse again. Another arrival. The waiting cells were filled to capacity with those awaiting their judgment. More souls to weigh. Arthella stood, the hem of her dress whispering against the stone floor. Justice Day never ended. Chapter 4. The Riot. It began with a whisper. A rumor passed between cells like static. Arthella Day had faltered. She had hesitated during a verdict. A pause no longer than a breath, but enough to seed doubt in the minds of the condemned. By nightfall, the whisper had become a roar. The communal cells erupted. Prisoners, warlords, saboteurs, assassins turned on each other first, old grudges igniting like dry tinder. Then they turned on the guards, alien sentinels bred for obedience and fear, their weapons useless against the sheer volume of rage. The Hall of Judgment trembled. Arthella stood at the center, unmoving, her mind flooded with the chaos. She felt every scream, every blade, every betrayal. The psychic noise was deafening. Her empathic senses, once precise and surgical, now overwhelmed by the collective fury of thousands. A guard burst into the chamber, bleeding from the eyes. "They're coming," he rasped. "They want you." Arthella didn't respond. She didn't run. She simply turned to the portal. It shimmered, unstable, flickering between destinations. Malteron's control grid was failing. The portal could collapse, could kill her, could send her anywhere. She stepped forward. The guard reached for her but stopped, afraid of what he might see if he touched her mind. Arthella entered the vortex and vanished. The Hall of Judgment was overrun moments later. The throne was torn apart. The records, what few there were, burned. The prisoners howled her name not in reverence but in vengeance. But Arthella was no longer on Malteron. She was on Hades. And Hades was waiting. Chapter 5. The World of Exiles. Hades was not a planet. It was a sentence, a jagged sphere of volcanic plains, acid storms, and predatory ecosystems evolved from the worst genetic experiments of the war eras. It was where the galaxy threw its monsters. But Arthella Day was no monster. She emerged from the portal into a sky the color of rust, the air thick with ash and static. Her dress was torn by the transit, her neural dampeners, standard for all arrivals, clamped around her temples, muting her telepathy to a whisper. She stumbled forward. The ground beneath her was cracked lava, slick with rain that hissed on contact. In the distance, she saw movement, figures darting between ruined structures, scavenging, watching. Then came the sirens. A shrill mechanical wail echoed across the valley. Within minutes, a squad of armored figures surrounded her. They wore patchwork gear, scraps of military tech, tribal markings, and scavenged weapons. Their leader stepped forward, a towering alien with bioluminescent scars and a voice like gravel. "You are Arthella Day," he said. "Ultimate Justice, the one who sent us here." She didn't answer. "You will come with us." She was cuffed, her dampeners reinforced, and marched through the ruins of what had once been a penal wasteland. But now it was something else. A city. Crude, chaotic, but organized. Watchtowers built from starship wreckage, markets trading in food, weapons, and information. Children playing in the shadow of old war machines. Flags stitched from prison uniforms fluttered above the central square. They had built a society out of exile, out of rage, out of necessity. And now they had laws. She was taken to a stone chamber lit by plasma torches. At its center sat the Council of Rules, 7 beings from 7 worlds, each once condemned by her hand. Their eyes burned with purpose. "You will stand trial," the leader said, "for crimes against justice." Arthella looked around. No throne, no portal, no silence, only voices. And for the first time in her life, she would be judged. Chapter 6. Taken. The chamber was carved from volcanic glass, its walls etched with symbols of exile, scratches, sigils, and blood-marked oaths. Arthella stood in the center, surrounded by the Council of Rules. 7 figures, each once condemned by her hand, now cloaked in authority reclaimed from ruin. Her neural dampeners pulsed against her skull, muting her telepathy to a dull ache. She could no longer read them, could no longer see the truth behind their eyes. She was blind. The council leader stepped forward. His name was Karn Vey, a former planetary strategist turned insurgent. Arthella had sentenced him for orchestrating the collapse of 3 colonies. Now he wore a mantle of stitched armor and spoke with the cadence of a ruler. "You are no longer the arbiter," Karn said. "You are the accused." Arthella didn't flinch. "You sentenced every soul here to Hades," another counselor hissed, a former biochemist whose experiments had liquefied entire populations. Without trial, without voice. Arthella's gaze swept the chamber. The crowd beyond the walls had grown, thousands of exiles pressed against the barricades, watching, waiting. Some bore scars, others bore weapons, all bore judgment. "You will stand trial," Karn repeated, "for crimes against justice, for the erasure of due process, for the tyranny of silence." Arthella spoke, her voice low but unwavering. "I saw what you were, what you did. You were judged fairly." "You saw what you wanted," Karn snapped, "and you sentenced us all the same. No scale, no mercy, no redemption." A murmur rippled through the chamber. "You will be given a trial," Karn said, "with witnesses, with a prosecutor, with a defense." Arthella raised her chin. "I will speak for myself." The council exchanged glances. It was unexpected, but not denied. "Then prepare," Karn said. "Tomorrow you will face the judgment of those you condemned." Arthella was escorted to a holding cell, bare stone, no bed, no light. The dampeners tightened. Her mind was silent, but her memory was not. She remembered every verdict, every scream, every moment of certainty, and for the first time she wondered, had certainty been enough? Chapter 7. The Prosecutor. The trial chamber was unlike anything Arthella had ever judged within. No obsidian throne, no psychic shielding, no silence. Instead, it was alive, buzzing with voices, flickering with torchlight, and vibrating with the anticipation of vengeance. Thousands had gathered. They filled the balconies, the walkways, the rooftops of the ruined city. Some wore the scars of Hades proudly. Others bore the insignias of the worlds they once ruled, now reduced to ash. All had come to see the woman who had cast them into exile. At the center of the chamber stood the prosecutor. He was tall, elegant, and alien, his skin a translucent blue, his eyes like polished obsidian. His name was Varnex Tral, once a logistics officer for the Colonial Supply Corps. Arthella had sentenced him for orchestrating the theft of vital resources from frontier worlds, leading to mass starvation across 3 systems. But here he was something else. He wore a robe of woven circuitry, his voice amplified by a resonance implant. When he spoke, the crowd fell silent, not out of fear, but fascination. "Citizens of Hades," he began, his voice smooth as oil, "we gather not to punish, but to reckon, not to destroy, but to define." He turned to Arthella. "This woman," he said, "has sentenced every soul here to a life of torment, without trial, without testimony, without the dignity of defense." The crowd murmured. Arthella stood motionless, her dampeners still suppressing her telepathy. "She claims to see truth," Varnex continued, "but truth without context is tyranny. Truth without voice is silence. Truth without mercy is death." He paced slowly, his words weaving through the chamber like a spell. "I was guilty," he said. "I admit it. But I was not alone. I was part of a system, a machine, and I was never given the chance to explain." He gestured to the crowd. "None of us were." Arthella's gaze remained fixed, her expression unreadable. Varnex stepped closer. "Today we will speak. We will testify. We will show her what justice truly means." He turned to the council. "I call my first witness." The chamber erupted in applause, and for the first time in her existence, Arthella Day was not the one asking the questions. She was the one being judged. Chapter 8. The Witnesses. The chamber was restless. After Varnex Tral's opening salvo, the crowd had grown louder, more volatile. The air buzzed with anticipation, not for justice, but for reckoning. Arthella stood in the center, her neural dampeners still active, her mind muted, her posture unshaken. The first witness was called. A former warlord named Sethra Vaughn, once the scourge of the Drelian expanse. Arthella had sentenced him without hesitation. His mind had been a furnace of conquest and cruelty. But now he walked with a limp, his voice hoarse, his eyes hollow. "I was guilty," he said, "but I was also changing. I surrendered. I tried to rebuild. I begged for trial. She gave me exile." The crowd murmured. Arthella said nothing. The second witness was Dr. Elian Vos, a geneticist accused of creating weaponized plagues. Arthella had seen the devastation in his thoughts, cities choking on engineered air. But Voss spoke of coercion, of threats from warlords, of a family held hostage. "She saw the crime," he said, "but not the context." The third was Captain Chon, a smuggler who had ferried weapons to rebel factions. Arthella had judged him guilty of fueling civil wars, but Chon spoke of survival, of choosing lesser evils, of trying to protect his crew. "She never asked why," he said, "only what." Witness after witness came forward, a diplomat framed by rivals, a rebel betrayed by his own, a thief who stole to feed a dying colony. Each told their story, each revealed a truth Arthella had never heard because she had never asked. Varnex Thrall stood beside them, orchestrating the narrative like a maestro. His voice rose and fell with precision, painting Arthella not as a monster but as a machine, cold, efficient, and blind to nuance. She judged our crimes, he said, but not our lives. The crowd erupted. Arthella remained still. Inside, something shifted. Not doubt, but recognition. She had seen the truth of their actions, but not the truth of their choices. And now, for the first time, she would have to speak, not as judge, but as defendant. Chapter 9. The Defense Begins. The chamber was quiet now. The witnesses had spoken. The prosecutor had woven their stories into a tapestry of condemnation. The crowd was restless, hungry for resolution. But the council had granted Arthella her right to speak. She stood slowly. Her neural dampeners remained in place, but her presence alone shifted the air. She didn't pace. She didn't plead. She simply walked the perimeter of the chamber, her gaze sweeping across the faces of those she had once judged. "I will not ask for mercy," she said. "I will not ask for forgiveness." Her voice was low, deliberate, each word a blade. "I judged you, not by your words, not by your pleas, but by the truth buried beneath them." She stopped before Sethra Vaughn, the warlord who claimed redemption. "I saw the moment you ordered the execution of 1,000 civilians. I felt your pride, your certainty, your belief that power justified atrocity." She turned to Dr. Elian Voss. "I saw your fear. Yes, but I also saw the moment you chose to release the virus. You could have resisted. You didn't." To Captain Chon. "You smuggled weapons into a civil war. You profited from bloodshed. You told yourself it was survival, but you knew what you were fueling." The crowd stirred. Varnex Thrall rose. "Objection," he said. "She's using her powers. She's violating the terms of the trial." Arthella turned to him. "My powers are not a weapon. They are a mirror. I do not fabricate. I do not manipulate. I see. And what I see is truth, unfiltered, unmasked, unrepentant." She stepped to the center of the chamber. "You speak of context, of nuance, of redemption. But justice is not a negotiation. It is a reckoning." Her voice cracked, not with weakness, but with weariness. "I have lived alone, judged alone, carried the weight of every verdict. If I was wrong, then I have already been punished." She looked to the council. "I do not recognize your authority, but I honor your survival. You built something out of exile. You forged order from chaos." She bowed her head. "Judge me, then, not for what I saw, but for what I chose to do with it." Silence fell. The council conferred, and the fate of ultimate Justice Arthella Day hung in the balance. Chapter 10. The Objection. The chamber was electric. Arthella's defense had pierced the silence like a blade, unapologetic, unflinching, and unfiltered. Her voice had not pleaded, it had revealed. And for a moment even the crowd of exiles seemed unsure whether to cheer or recoil. Then Varnex Thrall rose. "Objection," he said, his voice sharp and amplified. "She is using her powers. This trial was meant to be fair, transparent, free of manipulation." The council stirred. Karn Vey leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Arthella turned to Varnex, her silver eyes steady. "My powers are not manipulation," she said. "They are perception. I do not twist minds. I witness them." Varnex stepped closer, his tone rising. "You invaded our thoughts. You exposed our secrets. You weaponized memory." Arthella didn't flinch. "I did what I was born to do. what I was made to do. I judged. She turned to the council. You asked me to speak. I have. You asked me to defend myself. I did. But I will not pretend that I am something I am not. She stepped toward the crowd, her voice rising, not with volume but with clarity. I am not a tyrant. I am not a savior. I am a judge. And what I saw in you was not just guilt. It was not pain, fear, regret. I saw the brutal truth beneath the crimes. She paused. And I judged you, not because I hated you, but because I believed the galaxy deserved peace. The crowd was silent now. Varnex looked to the council, his expression tight. She refuses to follow the rules. Carnvey stood. She has followed them. She has spoken. And now we will decide. Arthella bowed her head, not in submission, but in respect. The council turned inward, their voices hushed, and the galaxy's most feared judge waited, for the first time, not to pass judgment, but to receive it. Chapter 11. The Rescue. The council's deliberation had not yet begun, but the chamber was already transformed. Arthella's defense had fractured the narrative Varnex's trial had so carefully constructed. The crowd, once unified in its thirst for vengeance, now murmured with uncertainty. Arthella stood alone in the center, her neural dampeners still active, her telepathy suppressed. But her voice, her presence was no longer muted. The crucible dimmed, but the chamber remained charged, like the air before a storm. Then came the tremor. Not psychic, physical. A low hum reverberated through the chamber's walls. Lights flickered. Security drones retracted. The crowd turned as the chamber doors hissed open. Galactic Marines flooded in, armor gleaming, visors polarized, weapons holstered but ready. Their insignia bore the sigil of the Outer Accord, the interstellar peacekeeping force rarely seen within Hades' space. At their center strode Commander Cole Willis, a veteran of the psychic wars, his presence as commanding as Arthella's once was. He approached her without ceremony. "Judge Day," he said, voice clipped, "the riot on the prison planet has been contained. Your extraction was authorized hours ago." Arthella didn't move. "The portal is no longer secure," he added. "We need to evacuate you before the next wave hits." She looked past him to the crowd, still reeling from her revelations. Some wept, some stared, some reached for her without knowing why. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Not until they vote." Cole Willis blinked. "You're cleared. You don't need to stay any longer." "I do," she said. "Not as a judge, not as a symbol, as a defendant." He hesitated. "You understand what that means?" "I do," she said. "For once I want to be judged with them, not above them." Cole Willis studied her, then nodded once. "We'll hold the perimeter," he said. "But if this goes sideways—" "I'll face it," she said, "like they did." The Marines withdrew to the edges of the chamber, silent sentinels, and Arthella stepped back into the center. Not rescued, not removed, resolved. Chapter 12. The Verdict. The chamber had gone silent, but the mental storm hadn't. It pulsed with something ancient, older than law, older than war. A collective breath held across thousands of minds, waiting to exhale. Galactic Marines lined the perimeter, visors dimmed, weapons at the ready. They weren't here to enforce. They were here to witness. Commander Cole Willis stood at the edge of the dais, arms folded, unreadable. He had seen empires fall, rebellions rise, and verdicts carved into planets. But this was different. Arthella Day stood alone in the center, her silhouette framed by the crucible's fading glow. She looked neither triumphant nor condemned. She looked present. High Chancellor Virex rose, his voice stripped of ceremony. This trial has revealed what no regular court could, but we do not decide. You do. He gestured to the crowd. The vote would be simple: hand to heart, mercy; hand to brow, condemnation. But the choice was anything but. One by one, hands moved, some trembling, some defiant, some reluctant, some reverent. The holographic tally shimmered into view. Mercy, 61%; condemnation, 39%. A hush fell. Not relief, not outrage, recognition. Arthella didn't react. She didn't collapse. She didn't celebrate. She stepped down from the platform, her boots echoing like punctuation in a sacred text. Varnek's trowel approached her, slow, cautious. "You're free," he said. She turned to him, her voice low. "Number, I'm accountable." She faced the crowd, her voice rising, not with power but clarity. "I will return to Maltaron. I will not wield blind judgment again. I will look deeper into the crimes of those I judge, into their true motives." She paused, letting the silence breathe. "And when the next reckoning comes, I will not be its voice. I will be its witness." Commander Cole Willis stepped forward, his voice quiet. "You could have left. You stayed." "I had to," she said. "Justice isn't what we deliver. It's what we endure." The chamber didn't erupt. It exhaled. Outside, the stars shifted. Not metaphorically, literally. The portal realigned. Its beacon no longer pointed inward, but outward, toward the frontier, toward the unknown, toward what justice might become. In the archives, a new entry was etched. Arthella Day, not judge, not martyr, not monster, just human. Witness to the weight of justice, architect of its evolution. And somewhere in the minds of those who had touched her memories, a new question began to form. What does justice become when it learns to feel? The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.